Good afternoon. My name is Mark Anielski. I'm the author of The Economics of Happiness, Building Genuine Wealth, and the soon to be released book, An Economy of Well-Being. I'm pleased to be with you today, though not in person. I'd like to present you with some ideas that I have in terms of the future of money in banking, with a focus on happiness, the economics of happiness, and well-being. I look forward to hearing from you by email or in other correspondence. I would love to be there today with you, but unfortunately, I cannot travel to Washington. So I wish you success in your conference and your conversations. These are very important conversations on the future of our world's economy, particularly in North America, the US, and Canada. So I welcome your thoughts and your comments on what I'm presenting to you today, which will be uploaded on YouTube for you to watch at your leisure. Have a great conference.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Anielski. I'm the President and CWO, Chief Wellbeing Officer of Anielski Management Inc., an economic advisory consultancy based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I want to talk to you today about the economics of happiness and the future of money. I'm also a member of the Public Banking Associates with Walt McCree and Ellen Brown. I've been studying banking and money for most of my life, and I'm particularly fascinated with the nature of money, how it's created, who creates it, and how we can move forward beyond a current debt-based system to one in which is tied to our aspiration and common yearning, which is happiness and well-being. In 2007, I wrote the book The Economics of Happiness, compelled by my students at the Bainbridge Graduate Institute in Seattle, Washington, to really chart a new path, a new economic vision beyond simply materialism and GDP growth to one that I would call is well-being and the pursuit of happiness as per Jefferson's original Declaration of Independence. Some thought I was forecasting the 2008 financial collapse because I spoke about the problem of debt in the United States, in fact, the whole world. My new book, An Economy of Well-Being, will be out in May of this year. It sets out more detailed ideas and studies and practices of developing this new economy of well-being, including chapters on the future of banking, money, and impact investment. I have a dream, which is to build this new economy of well-being in which the way we measure progress is replaced with measures of what really matters to our well-being and our happiness. Buckminster Fuller once said, we can't change the existing system, but we must instead create a new system that is more compelling and makes the old system obsolete. This is no easy task. Back in 1968, Bobby Kennedy, in a remarkable speech at the University of Kansas, critiqued the gross national product, or GNP, and national income counts, arguing that this way of measuring progress did not consider the things that actually make life worthwhile, including our joy, our sense of nature, our community values, our relationships. Instead, we tend to measure progress only by one measure, the GDP, which measures how much money changes hand in the economy every year. From this slide, we could see that the United States, in fact, most countries, saw a bifurcation or tipping point in the mid-1970s. Most of the indicators you see on this graph start going south around 1975, around the OPEC oil crisis, the time when Nixon removed the US dollar from the gold standard. And so most of the measures of well-being have been going sideways, if not down, even as GDP rises. In 2000, I had the pleasure of updating the US Genuine Progress Indicator. The GPI is a new measure of economic progress that adjusts GDP for social and environmental costs, as well as the cost of inequality in society. When you deduct these costs, you get a different picture of growth. In fact, the GPI shows that overall well-being measured in economic terms has been declining since the mid-1970s, even as GDP has risen per capita. This graph shows the US real GDP, the top line, per employed worker rising, yet household incomes, you can see, have remained relatively flat, unchanged in real terms over several decades now. One of the issues few people and economists particularly don't understand is what drives economic or GDP growth. Uh, the issue of debt money is really important to understand here. If you take anything away this weekend, you need to understand that the entire economic system is based on a debt money system. That debt money system grows exponentially with every new loan that banks issue. 98% of our money is created by private banks when they issue loans, and instead that issuance of money could be done by public banks, a central bank owned by the people, and I'll get into that in a minute. But the burden of interest costs is so high and so unaccounted for, it's quite remarkable. So let me show you what's going on. This graph shows the U.S. total debt per capita. Total debt right now in the United States is around $68 trillion. That includes all government, private, consumer debt, foreign debt, and business debts. Sometimes we don't see this number because it's hidden or it's never shown to us. But you can see how this debt has been growing exponentially again since the mid-1970s. Yes, income has also grown, and so has GDP, but debt is growing at a much faster rate. And you can see in 2008, the crisis, the financial crash, slowed debt growth a little bit, flattened out, but has continued to increase. So now it's quite significant. I've calculated for every dollar of income earned by the average American household, roughly 53 cents will be spent now on hidden interest charges on that 68 trillion of outstanding debt. These are charges you don't see. They're the cost of every loan in society, every mortgage, every student loan, every business loan. All of these loans have interest attached to them, which encumbers our happiness and well-being. What this statistic tells you is that about half of your working life will be spent just working for the interest embedded in those debt, those loans that the private banks have created. Now the alternative is that public banks create money without cost, without interest, simply by issuing money in proportion to the needs of society. And I'll get into this in greater detail in a moment. The economics of well-being, or the economics of happiness, is based on a simple supposition that, based on positive psychologists' understanding of what makes people happy, we know that relationships are the most important thing to our happiness. Sufficiency of material needs is only a lesser attribute of our happiness. Once someone has enough income and has eliminated their debts, more money doesn't buy more happiness. In fact, that threshold may be around 50 to 70,000 US per household. Other things that contribute to happiness and well-being includes, of course, your physical, mental, and spiritual health or well-being, and our relationship with nature. In working with First Nations or Indian tribes in Canada and the US, I am learning something interesting, which is, first of all, that this notion of a hierarchy of needs that Maslow put forward, in fact, was not an original idea. It came from the Blackfoot people who he visited in southern Alberta, where I live, in which the Indigenous kind of cosmology or understanding of the person is one where someone has 4 attributes: physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional, and that all of these 4 attributes of well-being are balanced in what some call the medicine wheel or the sacred hoop. If one looks at the economy through the notion of a wheel rather than a pyramid, as Maslow suggested, then one can see that this is a model of harmony, of resilience, of flourishing, which is a different model than pure economic growth and debt growth, which is more like the cancer cell. The economy of well-being model is based on this premise that the goal of an economy is to improve the well-being conditions for people and nature. We need to have various metrics of performance or progress, which include domains of well-being, as outlined here, and we need measures that are both objective and subjective. This graph shows you a subjective well-being index, which I've been developing for communities, in which we ask people to self-rate their happiness, their quality of sleep, their spiritual well-being, their sense of whether they're making enough income to meet their needs, their enjoyment of life, the trust of people and their relationships with friends, families, and workers. This graphic shows you whether someone is flourishing. The notion of flourishing, the word flourish means to flower, hence the graphic here using Excel showing the conditions of well-being of a community of 1,800 in Alberta, which we've just analyzed this year. I have since connected with investment bankers and other investment analysts, such as Luc Ekblad, who is the chief investment officer for the oldest merchant bank in the world, Boustead Asset Management. Luc and I have been talking for the last 3 years about how we move investment or impact investment forward into a realm of well-being economics. We asked the question, what if we had a world in which there was always enough money to pay a living wage, and that this came from investing in the abundant and often hidden assets found in our community? We have proposed a well-being fund for community asset development. What does this mean? It means a fund that is investing in the assets of a community, of a neighborhood, with various missions, including eliminating poverty, providing zero-interest home equity financing to low-income households who can't otherwise afford a mortgage, supporting enterprises that pay living wages, renewing hope, and restoring neighborhood assets, and in that sense, achieving an economy of well-being. The Well-Being Investment Fund that we've proposed for the city of Cincinnati and for other cities, including Berkeley, California, has a mission of putting local and financial resources to work to build a thriving neighborhood, and in which the assets of that neighborhood are fully optimized. In other words, it achieves a well-being return on investment that is different than a financial return on investment. The goals of the fund is to leverage the highest and best use of assets in their neighborhood. This model is based on what I call a 5 capital model, where we have human, social, natural, built, and financial assets, which are all in harmony, just like that medicine wheel I just showed you. The notion of banking and the objective then of creation of credit is based on improving the well-being of the community and ensuring the assets of the community are in the highest and best flourishing state. So we move towards a well-being return on investment analytic. The fund structure we proposed looks something like this, where you have incoming funds from grants, neighbors, you and I investing our financial assets into the fund, but where the fund is now managed based on an asset model in which the assets of the community are the basis of the flourishing economy, and that those assets are fully financed through money creation, including the creation of a community public bank that can support asset investment without actually charging interest, simply by recovering operating costs. One of the key benefits of a public bank, since it doesn't have to generate a profit, and in the case of some public banks, like the Alberta Treasury Branch here in Alberta, doesn't even pay taxes because it's owned by the government, and therefore can leverage those assets fully without the burden of interest costs. These new generation of impact investment funds can solve a lot of issues that are so predominant in our society, including poverty, lack of affordable housing, green jobs, local food security, and paying living wages. If we looked at Cincinnati, we would see that a lot of people are still living below a living wage. 22 out of every 100 households in Cincinnati lives below the poverty line. That's a lot of households. And we think we could change that by doing what? By providing interest-free home equity mortgages to low-income households who otherwise can't afford even to pay for rent, but we can put those poor households into homes that were once heritage homes, now boarded up, stranded assets, into a mortgage that pays $500 a month, in which that family is debt-free. This is my friend Thomas Hargis, Reverend Thomas Hargis, paying one of his workers from a former halfway house, former prisoners, to restore a distressed old house with very little down, buying that property for less than $2,000 from the city, hiring guys that would not otherwise be employed, getting seconds materials from Lowe's and Home Hardware to restore that home to its to some type of high quality of life in which now a low-income household can afford a zero-interest mortgage. In closing, I wanted also to talk to you about my work with Habitat for Humanity, a remarkable organization. Habitat for Humanity in Edmonton provides zero-interest home equity mortgages, which allows a family, say, earning $40,000 to save around $9,000 per year in avoided interest payments, which would be on a typical mortgage. These cost savings alone are the equivalent of earning a living wage. I have shown that this approach to investment can help not only improves people's objective state of well-being, their financial conditions, but we've measured a well-being return on investment based on their perceived improvement in quality of life, the hope for their children's future. And this is actually a remarkable model that helps individuals who find themselves in financial poverty to come out of that poverty within 5 years and then contribute more positively to society. This just shows you the kind of the cost of a Habitat mortgage versus a conventional mortgage over a 5-year period. You can see how much that Habitat mortgage is saving that family who would otherwise be forced into rental living. And of course, we know the rent money just simply goes to the landlords. I'd like to close by saying thank you for having me and for contributing to the dialogue in your sessions. I did not talk about public banking per se, but otherwise we can see that this idea of a public or a community asset investment fund marries very nicely with the model of public banking, in which assets of the community are fully financed and leveraged through a public banking structure. Of course, there are alternatives to public banks, including credit unions, which are also shared asset models. But the future, I believe, is of a world in which we can eliminate the burden of debt and debt money, replace the debt money system with a well-being based financial architecture in which society in general will be much better off, will be happier, will work less, and we will be kinder to nature. So thank you very much and have a great conference.